And we're live with Emily and Jeff, both ESFPs, and Bradley, who is related to one. So, so Bradley, we can actually start off. Bradley, if you talk for a few minutes about your sister, you were saying there about her, the way she uses extroverted sense and being quite sophisticated. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I was just saying, to me, it seems very sophisticated because, whereas, to me, since I S.E.E, point of least resistance, to me, it can be very intimidating when someone uses it. When someone's using it generally, but when someone's directing it towards me, I'm always, I'm not sure if they mean to be aggressive or if it's just them sort of doing what they do. But in the case of my sister, it's sort of, I think she's aware of how S.E.E can come off, and she's always to me, it always seems very calculated the way she's taking risks. I think she's mean-spirited, but she's not like she's outwardly being mean. She does mean things, but she does it in such a way to where it's almost charming. So before I sort of understood what S.E.E was, I thought it was just, I could understand like why she was, poking people and coming up from behind and doing the thing on the legs where you hit them like in between. I forgot what the the part where the legs bend over, like trying to like I guess deck people and doing that sort of playfully, just sort of running around and doing those sort of things.
What age was this, Bradley? What age was this kind of behaviour? Because I need to make an internal judgment about how bad that is.
I mean, it could be current, probably.
Yeah, it's ongoing. I'd say it's even. As she got more comfortable.
That's probably how you guys relate.
Yeah, that reminds me of
yeah.
Something Ben brought up in another video, but he didn't have the facts quite right as usual. But he was relating a story I had told of when I was probably like 11 or 12 range, something like that. And I had a friend that we would hang out, go to movies, stuff like that. And he had two sisters. He had twin sisters, and we would go to the movie in the mall, and then they would like hang out in the mall, and I would see the movie with him. And then there was a time afterwards where we were all waiting for their mom to come pick us up. And one of those times was like winter time, so outside it was cold, and I had a heavy jacket. But inside the mall, they had the heater, so it was, I wasn't wearing it. I was just holding it. And at some point, it was kind of this big fluffy coat, so it wasn't like hard or anything, but it was, and I turned and I like hit him with it, just because I felt like it just for fun. And his sisters like started laughing. They thought this was hilarious. So I did it again, and then he got mad at me and told me to stop doing it. So I said I would, and then I did it again anyway because I was entertaining his sisters so much that I couldn't like resist doing that. So I think Ben used this as an example when he was talking about like what I said about SPs not feeling guilt.
Yeah.
Because I said the closest version I have of it is something like that where I felt bad that he got hurt because I wasn't trying to, because he said something like, I thought you were my friend or something. He's real dramatic about it. And I was like, man, I'm sorry because I wasn't trying to hurt him. But it was just like the pull of having an audience that was entertained was like so strong that overwhelmed my feelings of, he might be hurt by this. So I'm not sure if that really qualifies as guilt, but I did sort of feel bad that, that he had been hurt by it. It just wasn't. It wasn't intentional.
Oh, well, I'm going to give you feeling points there, Jeff, because it was a minor thing. I mean, Bradley's just talking about like actual assaults from his sister, and
I don't think it sounds like assault.
Yeah, it's not.
That's going a little far, don't you think?
No.
Well, it sounded really similar to what I was talking about. Where it's like she's just playing with people, but it can sometimes go a little too far.
Yeah.
Depending on the person.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's sort of like a tightrope performance where it could easily be assault if you take it too far.
She's testing you. I think she's testing you to see like, are you going to push back? Are you going to set your boundary, or how far can she go? If you
Yeah.
don't set it, it's going to keep happening. Borderline
me,
assault.
It's
It's
that's the thing that makes me really angry is the fact that they are doing the testing.
Well,
It's
the
just
thing
hard.
is,
I think
it's like,
that is a core part of being SE. I think it is. I don't know why or what it is, but that's
Because
just
it's
part
like
of it.
she said, if you set the boundary, like, it's like, you know, when you get to a certain maturity level, you know, and that's obviously not the same place for every person, or every SP person, obviously, but like, I now, you know, I was talking to my coworker and I was saying, if somebody tells me something, you know, even when it's just talking, not even anything physical, but like something they don't want me to talk about or something they're like offended or hurt by or whatever, then I can not do that. And I'll still find another way to kind of like tease them about something. But if there's something that's like, well, this is a line you don't cross, I can respect that and not do that. It's just I'm going to find like little other ways,
Yeah.
you know, so it forces you to adapt, you know, it's like, so, but you have to, if you, you know, you have to find those in the first place. If you don't know what they are, then, you know, you might sometimes.
Or
push it a
I
little
could
too
see her
far.
having some kind of like want to like loosen you up in some area. Like what are those things she's pushing? Like maybe
Yeah.
she thinks that you need to be more like loose in those areas or not so serious or something like that.
I actually
yeah,
think.
because
I
sorry,
just
go
want
on
to
then.
make a quick point. Is that I actually think so, Jeff? Is that like an extra bit of fuel for you because it like when you just sit there forces you to adapt. Now you got a little few some guidelines. It also means you have to be a little bit more creative rather than if you were with someone who just like took everything. Maybe that's like, oh, you're no fun. You just let me say anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing a lot of people don't understand because they again, it's like they view like SPs as being like extreme behavior, but the thing is it's not always extreme. It's like just trying to push it more extreme than it is. It's like finding those things, and if there's not a boundary, then there's nothing to push against. Then if it's just complete openness, then it's boring because there's no resistance. So, you know, that's the thing I had to learn too. And so it's hard, you know, harder for me to explain it to people because I didn't even understand it myself for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose the phrase be like playing tennis with the net down.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways where it's like, you know, you got to have some kind of resistance or something pushing back, or else, you know, you're not really getting anything out of it. But that doesn't, but it's different than being shut down. That when shut down completely, then that's worse because it's like you have no freedom or no, you know, ability. It can't be that. It just has to be, you know, this is where the boundaries are.
Right. So
Do you think that do you think that there could be some link to like that tendency that driver SEs have to like do that? Is some sort of attempt to is there any link with being vulnerable in that, like not wanting to be vulnerable or feel uncomfortable ourselves, and so we're this might be too much of a stretch, I'm not sure, because I am curious. I'm like, why do we do that? Like, what is the reason for that? What's the purpose? I'm not sure.
It's a given of the temperament. That's like saying why is an NT an NT or an NF an NF? We have to like realize.
I'm not
It's
even
Well,
sure
I
there
mean, the
is a
answer-
good reason for it
There's
because
got
it's
to
just
be.
doing what you do.
To me,
No,
the
but
answer
like,
is in
why
this
are we doing what we do?
Because it says that's how we get, you know, our self-image is improved by those things. So that triumvirate of A words, you know, artistry, audacity, adaptability, those are the things that give us like our self-worth. Like,
But if it's
so-
hurting somebody else or like
well,
making someone else uncomfortable, that doesn't seem like a good way to get that.
again, there's varying degrees of that because some, you know, obviously some people don't care at all.
Right.
They hurt somebody else. And then there's other people that care a lot, and then everybody else is somewhere in between. It's like, you know, I can only speak for myself in that I think I don't set out to hurt people, but I know that sometimes me doing that has hurt people. So it's not the goal is never to hurt people.
Right.
And the fact that I know that sometimes they could be is not like I don't care about that. But also on the other hand, I don't want to walk on eggshells around everybody and be like, oh, I can't, don't want to say or do anything that could possibly offend someone. You know, I don't want to live that way.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be a medium somewhere in there, you know.
Yeah, I guess that's where using FI or TI would be the grounding. Like, what are you living by? What are you choosing to base your actions upon? Would come in handy.
Yeah, I think I'd vote on the artisan sheet, where it's like, I mean, if we're going to go functions about this, it's always SE. That's one thing. So that's like improvising in the present context, all the stuff about improvising, and that's always like combined with either FI, your own personal values and stuff, or TI, your own subjective personal theories, where you ignore everybody else's logic and go with your own logic and stuff. And so ISTPs and ESTPs, they go with their own logic, and SFPs go with their own feelings, their own feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in that, you know, diagram he just put up there, you know, the audacious, it says where it says self-respect. So that's really the answer to that is, and for why we do that, is more about respecting ourselves for not being like too, I don't know what the right word is. It's not really wimpy, but, you know, just, you know, not having that boldness or audacity. Like if we don't do something like that, if we just kowtow to everybody else's wishes, then we don't respect ourselves as much.
Mm-hmm. What is this chart that I'm seeing? I see the self-respect, but what is this whole thing?
This is from Please Understand Me Too. And
okay.
This is David Keirsey being an INTP. Let's put it in a nice little table.
I like that. So concrete, the artisan, is what we fall under.
Yeah.
Right.
So speech is concrete.
Tactical. We talked about the tactical, okay.
Yeah.
Interest, education, preoccupation, vocation.
Yeah, typical. Obviously, you can have like people in different areas, and they find like a different angle on things. Like there's an aspect of it. So, for instance, you can have like SJs who are like into science, but it's like because they want to help people. Like saying it, you can have like, and Keirsey even won't say the ISFJ profile that you can have ISFJ general practitioners. And so you can have people from different temperaments in backgrounds that you don't usually associate with it, like from like a stereotypical point of view. So it's like Jeff and I talked about, you know, it's possible to have like an SJ comedian, such as like Jay Leno, or you could even have, but usually these areas are dominated by one kind of temperament. So in the entertainment industry, it would be dominated by SPs. Science will be dominated by certain areas.
Interesting.
But
Okay.
you do get the other temperaments in there, and it's actually interesting to ask those people to actually find out what are their reasons for like going into these areas. Just get these little nuances.
I like that. Okay.
Right then.
Yeah,
So now
it's been my experience that like the SJs that are into stuff about personality types or things, the main reason they are is either because that's their major area of study in school, or they're going into it as a profession in some way. So they see it as useful. This is like knowledge that I need to get for my career, or it's less about, oh, I need this because I'm about understanding people, like a lot of the N types when they go into it. You know, it's not that they don't want to understand people, but it's just it's with a goal in mind that has to do with you know their work or their family or something like that.
I can give you an example of that. I know a female ESTJ, and I think that her interest, she did her degree was in like sales and stuff. So it's there like wanting to understand people for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be interesting. ESTJ in sales.
Can I ask Jeff and Emily, what was sort of you don't have to like be elaborate, you can be really brief, but like what was the draw of wanting to know more about typology? Because I know some people just like look at it as like, okay, that's cool, and just like that's it. But it's always I'm always interested, especially when sensors are interested, since it's stereotypically for intuitives seem to like eat this stuff up, especially INFJs, and then sensors not so much. But what are your What's your interest in typology? Would be the simple question.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, it was I discovered that simply by being about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happened like about almost 9 years ago now, I guess, or maybe 10 years ago. Man, it's been forever. I had done like I won't go into a long thing because I already talked about this on some of my videos too. But my mom had given me the test from the original Please Understand Me back when I was like 19 or 20, and I didn't really take it seriously. In fact, when I took the test, I kind of tried to screw it up because she had said that she had an idea of what type she thought I was, and so my main goal in taking the test was trying to answer things in a way that wouldn't result in whatever she thought I was. So I didn't take it that seriously, but I didn't forget about it. Like I eventually read most of the rest of the book, and I thought for some reason I was sort of fascinated with the concept. I've always kind of had this weird attraction to like hierarchies, whether it be like military or things like that, where there's sort of like ranks of things or types, groupings of stuff. I don't know why that appealed to me, but there's some part of me that likes that sort of thing, the categorization kind of thing. So that set this sort of like vague thing in the back of my head that I remembered that. And then like over the years, especially when, the internet became more and more like, common where there are all these things on the internet, then there started to be a lot of like these little quizzes that would pop up like, I had a girlfriend that was like, take this test about like romantic capability or what's it called, compatibility or whatever, things like that, and then somehow in the course of those type of things, it would come up again like, oh, here's this, and I would remember. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember doing this thing with the letters and the stuff. So, but it wasn't anything I took that seriously. It was just sort of a casual thing for a long time. And then one of those times that I had either been reading about it or somebody showed me the quiz or something, and I was like, oh, which one of those was I? And I looked it up, and I actually, because it's just always been something I did once the internet became, what it was, where there's all this information, is that whenever I got interested in something, I would look to see if there was like any kind of groups or discussion stuff online about it, message boards, things like that. So that was when I discovered a site that then was called MBTI Central and later changed to Typology Central, because they actually got contacted by the official MBTI people and said, you can't use this. But anyway, and I discovered really quickly when I looked into that site that my type was like barely, if at all, represented on that site. And so instantly I had this like unique way to get attention from people, because it was just like, hey, I'm this type and I exist. And all of a sudden people are like asking me questions about my life and stuff, like, oh, they're like fascinated by me like I'm this science project. And I was like, oh, this is cool. So it gave me this avenue to be like, people to be fascinated by me by not even having to really do anything other than just being myself. So, I mean, you can imagine that like for, performer type, that's like you have this new audience that you're like dazzling with nothing but just like existing, So that was what really, and then, and then of course when I did that and I started like chatting with them and stuff like that, and then they would recommend all these books and things, and that was where I had learned, there was a sequel to Please Understand Me, and eventually I actually bought it and read it, and it just kind of went from there. So, I had a period of time where I was really like into it hardcore, and then that time passed, but I never forgot like the things that I had learned from it, because it's like, and I remember talking about this with David Keirsey, the junior, because we had a hangout a few times, and I remember saying, yeah, it's not something you can like escape. Once you know this, it's like when you're going around your daily life, you see the examples of temperament like everywhere. It's just, it comes up in so many contexts. Somebody will start talking, you're like, oh, okay, and you get, to just get that instant thing, where it's like, oh yeah, they're talking like this, they're doing the Guardian talk, or whether, whatever it is, or they're doing the, with N types, is usually they start doing all the what if questions. That's my major flag for that. When somebody like talks for 10 minutes and the majority of the things they're doing is like hypothetical things rather than stuff that actually happened to them. So it's stuff like that, that where I don't escape from it. So, but that's kind of the gist of it. How I got interested in the first place is it sort of like had these avenues of things that appealed to me. But Ben said in another video, that I've said before, and it's true, that I'm not into like psychology or even science or things like that, but I am into people. And so the elements of things that cross over into stuff that makes sense to me when it has to do with interacting with people and getting to know people, then those are the things that appeal to me. Not a bunch of like models and science experiments and things like that.
And also with Keirsey temperament theory, because because of its focus on words and tools being concrete, then that will jive Jeff.
Yeah, well, because it's about what you can see, what you can observe people do, as opposed to trying to spend your time like pretending like you can examine their brain. I know some people have actually examined brains, like Dario Nardi and people like that, but you have a lot of people that just simply they read a theory and they say, "Oh, then I know the following 17 things about people of this type," and it's like you don't know that. You're just speculating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I would go so far as to say with that, like depending on their type, they have an ability to be able to like see those like things, the intuitive things that I, as an ESFP, like that's my blind spot. I can't see it. So I kind of trust sometimes, like when I know people's types, I kind of know what their abilities are, and it helps me know kind of how to trust them in a way.
I think though that a smart ESTP can like mess with that by like they can put a little thing out there that they know that like say an NFP will extrapolate from, and it's like they know that they can lead them into a certain direction because they know where they're gonna take it based on experience. And I can imagine Morgan doing something like that in the future if he doesn't do it already at the moment, to like play with them to like see.
That's true.
And once again, Ben showing his T bias there by implying that it would have to be an ESTP that does that.
So have you done that, Jeff?
Well, okay. What I have done is I have realized, quite a while ago, that if you stress certain things in how you say things or how you answer questions, people will take elements or buzzwords or whatever it is of those particular things and use them to make assumptions based on that. So it doesn't take lying or pretending. It just takes answering things in a certain way. And Ben and I have talked about this a little before in terms of that at some point or another, either in text or on my videos, I've had at least one person call me every type there is, every Myers-Briggs type. At least one person has said, "Oh, I think you're really a blank," whatever, insert whatever type you want. All of them. and they've had a reason, most of them. Some of them, they just say they won't actually give me a reason, but they've usually had something where they point to and say, "This is what you said," or "This is what you did that sounded like this type to me." And a while back when I was, I mentioned the site Typology Central, I would regularly be in a chat room that was associated with that site. Sometimes it was audio chat, sometimes just text, but because of the fact that a lot of times people just didn't text, I could, and at that time they didn't have like a requirement of a certain username or password. You could come in as whatever you wanted, basically. I would sometimes come in to the chat room with a different name around the people who knew me, under my name, basically, and again, it wasn't pretending to be someone else. It was just using a different name and not like admitting who I was. But then if they started talking to me about whatever it was, and if they because a lot of the types that are in there, a lot of the N types, they have this thing where they like to figure out someone's type or whatever. So I would, let's say, sure, ask me questions and try to figure out my type, and I would answer, and I wouldn't lie. It was all true, everything I said about myself. But the way that I would say it would kind of be different than sort of my usual way of responding to things. So I wouldn't look for the things that I can give that sort of confirm people's biases. It was more like I would try to be as like values neutral as possible in my responses, and that would usually make people think that I was some sort of thinking preference type, because I'm not putting in these kind of feelery words. I was answering very factually, and then other times the opposite, where I would focus on the things that I think of that are more like hypothetical or abstract, and I would answer more along those lines. And again, it wasn't something where I'm making something up that doesn't really occur to me. It was things that it would occur to me, just not necessarily most of the time. It wasn't really my preference. So I could come off as really like if that's how I responded. So I kind of was testing that in terms of how people would adjust to those kind of responses, whether they would actually, and so it was interesting to see that there would be, one or two people in the chat room that would actually not figure out specifically who I was, but actually come pretty close to knowing my type. And I was like, these are the people I think that really understand this stuff really well, because even with me answering, in a sense, kind of cloaking myself, they would still see through that.
Makes sense.
That's gold. That is like, and also like Jeff, like staying within his own ethics of like not going too far where just that way. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I have told Ben before too that I, when I create fictional characters, that where I've created the character, like I mean, a lot of times it's pretty much myself, but it's just different variations on that. It's like if you dropped me into these circumstances, and I don't mean me physically, but I mean my personality. But okay, I'm a 12-year-old in South Africa or something. You pick the setting, you pick the peripheral stuff. Like here's the location, the way someone looks, the sex, the family, the whatever, and then how would I be within those parameters? And that's kind of my basis, for the characters that I've come up with. It's like usually they start as me, they just are changed by circumstance rather than type.
That sounded really interesting, and the sound was cutting out at the end.
Yeah.
You gave yourself the parameters, and then what happens?
It's just me within those parameters. So, I can stretch myself based on circumstance rather than the type. It's like not changing type. I've played, I've acted before and stuff like that. So I've played characters that are not my personality type, but it's always easier, of course, to play my type because I understand it better, even if the circumstances make it that I've got to stretch, my own kind of perspective so that I'm not just being me, exactly me. I'm just being like my personality within a different circumstance. Mm-hmm. So and I think probably some of the best characters were probably created that way, and that rather than somebody just trying to envision something that was very foreign to them, they thought about, this is what I understand, and now how would it be changed by the particular setting? Mm-hmm. Because you hear about like actors, and I think this is probably usually the NF actors, though not necessarily always, but I think more often that when they prepare for a part, they'll really like sink themselves into that particular thing, like they want to become that person that they're going to play. And sometimes like spending time in a different country or a different environment where this character is from, so they're like, I want to understand how this person feels, all that. And I think that's more of kind of the NF method of preparing for that, whereas an SP actor is more likely to say, okay, this is the circumstance, but how would I be in this circumstance, and bring that out in the character.
Right, so I'm thinking that we might as well stick with this hangout, and we'll probably have to do the tactical intelligence one in future. We'd have to go with the flow, adapt. Because we've got
probably
this.
my mistake for asking that question.
No, that's okay, buddy. No, it's because we've got these two paragraphs to go through, and then we can also go through Jeff's MBTI step 2 results. So, Emily, do we have about 45 minutes?
Uh-huh.
Right. So then, let's get cracking. Let's have a look at paragraph 9.
Okay. I'll read it.
Yeah.
In the matter of career, ESFPs enjoy entertaining people and are thus drawn to the performing arts, thriving on the excitement of being on stage in the limelight. But even in less glamorous pursuits, they prefer active people jobs over celerity, technical occupations, and thus they avoid science and engineering and gravitate toward business, where they are apt at selling, particularly at selling tangible goods. I'll comment on that. I mean, I've gravitated towards, and even currently, that's what I'm gravitated towards, is like business, selling, something sort of tangible, like a service, a language class. And now I'm kind of, not necessarily career-wise, definitely not to like that point where it would be that, but I think I skipped over the performance arts just for many reasons. And now I'm kind of like, it's coming back, and I'm really interested in building skill around performing arts. So I tried to do nursing because someone was like, oh, in college I switched my major many times, and someone was like, oh, you could make a lot of money like being a nurse and speaking Spanish. I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I just took some nursing classes, and then I realized really quickly I just couldn't. I failed chemistry. I was like, I don't even know what's going on. I hate this. I went to the hospital and saw like blood everywhere and like this woman moaning, and I was like, I can't do this, and I quit nursing after a semester. But I'm thinking back to college and just trying all the different things and switching majors and trying to figure it out. Like, I don't know how anyone can know what they're supposed to do just by thinking about it. You have to like try it.
Yeah, and you do get like little kids though who know exactly what they want to be in future. Like for instance, Charles.
Scary to me.
Oh, I've forgotten the name of that guy, Charles. Oh, darn it! And he had a little briefcase as a kid, and he always wanted to be a businessman. He's the big black guy on Fox News. He always wanted to be.
And I wonder, like, does that come from nurture? Like, does that come from the parents, or from the parents seeing something in the kid and then getting them in doing what they're supposed to do?
Oh, with him, it was like completely different because like he was in like a poor black neighborhood, and it's like he wanted to be the businessman.
So he saw that somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was like he wanted to. It's like he's like so SJ, this guy. It's like darn it, because we actually went through his like visuals in a Catherine Farber hangout. It's just I've forgotten his surname. He actually has a show now on Fox Business. Right.
I think it may have been the last part of this where I said that I'm attracted to like the presentation or creative side of business, but not the not the like numbers and paperwork side of business. That's the stuff that's so much of a hassle, in my opinion.
Oh, we could mention a little bit about the reason I'm bringing it up, as I've put there, Bill Clinton studied law, and Jeff and I and Dario and I think that Bill Clinton's the ESFP, and Carol Linden said that when Bill Clinton took the MBTI, he scored as ENFP. What do you think about that?
Well,
Jeff?
and there was a topic about that on the Keirsey forum back, in I don't know, 10 years ago, whenever that was, and Cody said it's like, the MBTI results, like, they're usually accurate, but not always. And that if you look at, those words and tools things again for, it's like he's a politician. He's trying to sound more NFy because it's effective. You speak in kind of the flowery speeches and you get the emotional impact on people. More so than coming out and saying like, I think this will be fun. You're going to get a small audience that responds to that, but you have a larger audience if you kind of couch it in this, hope and change and dreams and all this kind of stuff that sounds inspirational. And Clinton studied a lot of politicians who did that, and other people, other speakers that weren't even necessarily politicians, and kind of looked at, how did they get these things across in a way that was effective. And you can see him learning on the job if you really want to, because if you look at his speech to the 1988 Democrat Convention, so 4 years before he was nominated, he gave a speech that was criticized by a lot of people for going on way too long and not getting to the point, and not holding the audience, because it was the nominating speech for Michael Dukakis, and people thought he was hogging the spotlight too much and spending too much time talking about himself. And rather than, and even though he was talking about Dukakis a lot, but he was like, they were like, okay, get on with it. And he learned from that experience, and used that to make his speeches better, that by the time he got around 4 years later, everybody was praising how great of a speech maker he was, whereas 4 years earlier, they were kind of panning it. So he showed that adaptability, whereas rather than have that be a situation where he took it personally, where his feelings were hurt so much that he couldn't recover from it, he used it as a learning experience of, oh, this is how I can do this more effectively in the future. So, that's the thing when it comes to what Keirsey said about there not being any NF presidents. There are some NF politicians, but a lot of times they don't tend to last as long in the business of politics, because politics is basically the art of lying most effectively. And NFs don't want to often be part of a business that involves having to deceive people on a regular basis, because it violates their own values too much. Yeah,
I noticed that with Bill Clinton, because I used to watch CNN about 10 years ago, and they would say that, and even people who worked for Bill Clinton would say that he does have a tendency to suck all the oxygen out of the room and take the attention for himself. Like when he would stump for Obama, and then he would talk about himself.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that ESFP thing of wanting the attention on them.
Yeah. And yeah, when you talk about them taking the MBTI, and the other interesting was that Hillary did too, and she came up with ISTJ, whereas Keirsey said that she's probably INTJ. So it's interesting that you had them kind of flip on the NS thing versus the one they probably really are, because in both cases they're probably answering those questions under certain, I don't know, pretense is the right word, but a certain kind of desire, just like I said I had when I first took it, there was a desired result, and, something that they sort of subconsciously want to appear as was being presented there. But that's a whole other topic.
I'll keep going. All right. Performers can be extremely effective real estate agents, for example, because they are continuously and effortlessly scanning both clients and listings, gathering information to help them fit people to properties. These artisans love working with people and are outstanding at public relations. Their sociability and adaptability making them easy to get along with and fun to be around. They can be effective teachers, especially at the elementary level, and are also good at working with people in crisis, a talent which often leads them into social work, where they are very sensitive to the pain and suffering of others, particularly small children. ESFPs are childlike themselves, and perhaps this is why they seem so finely attuned to children's feelings. I have a lot to say about that. When I was in high school, I remember in our yearbook, it was like, what do you want to be in 10 years, or what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember being like, I don't know. And I thought it'd be probably pretty fun to be a real estate agent. I'll write this down. And I wrote that down. And now when I look back at my book, I'm like, that's so funny, because I remember that moment of what would I want to do? Not having any idea, not even knowing what real estate agents do. So it's kind of weird I've always found that interesting, because I just made it up. It had zero intent on ever doing that. But part of what I do with my job, that's one of my favorite things, is reading a student inquiry. I'll get an inquiry, and all the questions are pretty personal. What's your learning style? What is your personality like? What are you wanting to learn Spanish for? I want to know all of the personal things, because I love being able to see that, and then being they would know how old they are, where they live, just kind of to match them up with the perfect teacher or someone that would be a good fit. That's one of my favorite things to do. And then, I mean, it is. All of our teachers are great, but like, I like to think I've recommended someone or helped make a good fit, a good match. And the other thing I was going to say, good at working with people in a crisis. Before I started my business, I worked in a group home for teenage girls that were in DHS, which here in the US is like a government, I don't even know how to describe it. Do you know what DHS is?
Well, Homeland Security.
No, it's Department of, what does it stand for? Do you guys know?
I was going to say home security as well.
Home safety? Homeland safety? It has to do with like, it's an organization and they go around and they make sure that like kids, they're protecting children. So like they are social workers and they'll go into like homes and like foster homes and that kind of thing. So I worked in this home with these teenage girls that they were taken away from their families because of abuse or whatever. And I was like essentially this parent figure, adult teaching parent was my title. And I lived at the home and I had to there were 8 girls that lived there and I had to navigate a lot of serious stuff like violent things or running away or physical altercations. It was just I really honed my communication skills and learned how to, I don't even know, just live with 8 teenage girls that had serious issues. But I would say that was there was a potential crisis every time I was there, every time I was with them. And the last thing I would say is, so I was drawn to that for a period of time, but to do that forever I don't know how anyone could do that forever. It's like a season for me. With children's feelings, yeah, I love kids, and I feel like I can just there's just a connection that is very hard to describe, but I would say finely attuned to children's feelings is definitely accurate for me.
If anybody wants to listen to me in depth talk about that subject, I actually did a series of videos when I still was thinking of myself as an ISFP, but everything I said still applies, obviously. And I did basically a whole video on that topic, because it's in the ISFP description too, obviously, that, in not only enjoying being around children, but being, somewhat childlike and all that, those kind of elements. So I won't go into a long thing here, but I'll just say, if you want to hear me talk about that, you can look at my ISFP composer series on my channel, the SB Spaz, and I did quite a bit of talking about that subject, including some about how it feels to be an SFP male with those feelings and desires, and have there sort of be a social stigma on men for wanting to be around children and do things with kids, and that being some kind of sinister thing always. And so I talked about that too.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Emily, about your experience with, because that's something you told me in private and I didn't tell anybody else, and I thought I could have always used that as evidence of Emily's good people skills and how it can be trained up through experience.
Oh yeah, I think I just naturally gravitated to jobs or situations that would help me learn certain things that I needed to learn, but it was according to my nature. And nursing was just not one of those things for me.
So we've got 10 now. Oh yeah, and I put there that I know it's a little bit it's one of these things where it's a bit black and white to say, oh, this is FE, this is FI. I just think that that's more of an FI thing, if you're working with somebody one-on-one. But again, it's broad categories and broad strokes and things.
Mm-hmm.
So
well,
yeah,
I found the more connection I have one-on-one with somebody, and like I've met them one-on-one and we have our relationship, and if I have met many people and then there's a group, it's much easier for me to maybe seem like I'm using FE, but it's really I had used my FI. And does that make sense, Ben? I know you've mentioned FE for me, and I've thought about that, but I think it's FI. I think it's FI.
Well, it's not. I mean, as we know, I mean, it's not. They're not like real things. It's like they're just like broad categorizations and trends. With
That's
these,
kind of what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Big surprise for me, but I mean, I'm like, to me, it doesn't really matter what you label it. You know, in that sense, it's just, you know, about that being attuned to children's feelings. It's like, for me, it's so just natural that I just get absorbed into their world really easily. Like, it's I don't even think about it. You know, when I start talking to kids, it's like I can relate. I don't have to, you know, I don't have to like think of it as like a clinical thing. Like, oh, do I get inside the mind of this child and think about such a? It's just natural, kind of my responses to, and I'm not like. It doesn't mean that I'm detached from reality of my own adulthood. It just means that it's not at all difficult for me to put myself in that world, because it's really very much how mine still is. It's just my mentality, my adaptability with reality around me, adult reality, is that I have to do things that I wouldn't do when I was a kid, but that's not my preference. So it's real easy for me to, you know, kids, you know, playing on the playground, it's real easy for me to play with kids on the playground, because it's like, that's what I want to do anyways, you know, just have fun. So, you know, and even talking to kids about whatever it is they're interested in and things like that is really easy for me to do.
So Jeff, was there a certain point when you got annoyed when Morgan got a little bit older, and it's like you almost wished for, well, can't you just stay about 8 or 6?
Yeah, to a point, and he did also about himself. You know, he would say himself he wanted to be like stay 6 and or things like that. You know, and I understand where that comes from, even though it was always mixed feelings, because on the one hand I did enjoy the process of watching him grow up, and what things did change and what he'd be interested in or things like that. But yeah, obviously I've got audio recordings of when first took him to Disneyland when he was 5, and you know, it's some of the cutest recordings ever, you know. getting really excited about, you know, going on the Winnie the Pooh ride and going to the Haunted Mansion and all those kind of things, you know, and just hearing the like genuine reactions to everything, of the joy and the, like, you know, when he was scared of something, or when, you know, just, and, you know, not any kind of consideration for, you know, what people's expectations are, just being genuine. You know, that's what I love about kids in general. And so it's like, you know, when I asked him at the end of the time, like, what was your favorite thing we did on the trip? And he said, like, mostly everything. And I just thought that was a great answer. I'm like, yeah, you know, and it's like, I'm asking him this while we're sitting in the ice cream parlor eating ice cream. So it's like, when I try to get him to be a little more specific, then he starts talking about the ice cream, because it's like, that's what he's doing now. So that's what it's on his mind. You know, it's not like he's going to sit there and be like, oh, let me analyze this trip starting with day 1. You know, and I didn't need him to. You know, it was fun to just have the genuine response.
In fact, Jeff, talking about that with analyzing, because I think you went to Disneyland when you were a young kid, and one of your brothers is an INTP. Did he ever like remember like an INTP answer where he like gives an answer like that?
I wasn't as young as Morgan was when we first went. It was I was 11 or almost 11. I was like 10 or 11, you know, almost, I think 10 and almost about to turn 11, because my birthday's in the summer. So if we had a vacation, it usually was in the summer. And I don't really remember much about what my brother's responses were to anything. I didn't ask them those type of questions. Now, when we went to Disney World in Florida 5 years later, I think, when I was in high school, my younger brother and I actually he had a micro cassette recorder, and we actually recorded some stuff on that trip, including sort of reviewing the different rides and shows we did after the fact. We started in the hotel room when we were there, and then when we got home, we continued we finished that off. So, which was kind of funny, because some of the things we didn't really remember exactly. So we would like start reviewing something and get halfway through and then realize we didn't actually do it. But that's how good we were at making stuff up. We'd be like saying stuff about it, and they were like, wait a minute, well, we actually did that. So yeah, but you know, as a younger, like the main thing I remember of the Disneyland, the first trip to California, as far as, you know, personality type stuff was about myself rather than my brothers. But because I remember that how much fun I had when we were on the train. We went on the train between San Francisco and LA, and I had somehow come across these sports trivia cards that had like questions on one side and answers on the other. So I was like, I found this group of adults on the train. I don't know who they were, just somebody who was us riding, and I started asking them, sort of saying, you know, these sports trivia questions and then giving them answers. And so they were having a good time, like trying to see if they could answer these questions. And most of it wasn't anything I knew any about because they were old. So it was like stuff from, I don't know, maybe the 60s or the 70s or something. So most of the people I never even heard of at that point. But it was so much fun interacting with the adults and like impressing them with being able to, you know, like talk about these things, even though I was just reading off of cards, that I started making my own up, you know, and started my improvisation skills. Like when I ran out of ones where I'd asked all the questions, I started making up questions and answers just out of nowhere, like to see if they would get, you know, whatever it is. And I often, you know, later on, I kind of wondered, you know, if any of them or how many of them thought, you know, realized I was doing that, or they, you know, they thought, because, but they didn't matter. They weren't going to like embarrass me when I was a kid. They were just like, you know, I think they were having fun too. So, but I remember that because it was another example of what I said earlier about the, you know, the audience, where in this case nobody was getting hurt, but it was the same feeling, you know, of being like just wanting that feeling to continue of entertaining the audience at all costs, including just making things up because that was all I had to do.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All good. I like
Okay.
all these anecdotes.
All right, where are we at here? The last paragraph. Performers, sociable and outspoken artisans make exciting and entertaining, though somewhat unpredictable, mates and parents, which may give their families a good deal of anxiety. They love to spend money on fun things like clothes, jewelry, sports cars, vacation trips, and so on, and they will impulsively use up their credit card limits and more without giving much thought to family necessities. ESFPs are happiest when their home is filled with people all having a good time, led by the ESFP, who weaves his or her way through the party, welcoming, teasing, laughing. In such a generally festive atmosphere, family problems will not be allowed to make their appearance. Performers prefer to walk by the graveyard whistling, often refusing to recognize their mate's dissatisfactions or their child's need for stability. Performers make warm, generous, loving friends to their mates and children, but should not be expected to take these relationships much more seriously than that. Well, my first thought is I definitely am like this all by nature, and that doesn't make a very great, reliable, stable parent. And that's one of the reasons why I've waited to have children, to like make sure that I'm doing the personal growth and development that is like required for me to do my best. I can't think of any greater commitment in this entire world than having a child, and I'm want to take that super seriously. And I think that's just kind of why I've been waiting, because I know that about myself, all of those things. So I kind of want to do it as prepared as possible so that I don't screw it up. Like even more than I'm going to screw it up. Everyone screws it up, but like on a big scale.
Like, wait until you're an INTJ then. Like, you just like,
I don't think I'm going to wait. No, it's more just like, am I being responsible with money? Am I being responsible, like making sure that I'm like my mood and my emotional health is stable, and like I don't want to be unpredictable and cause people anxiety. And anyway, I'm doing much better.
I think that also might be like stuff that's happened in your past that maybe is like affected you, Emily, rather than not just the type thing.
Oh yeah, I mean that always comes into play with everybody, and for me, yes, definitely. And if one particular thing in the past would be money and living like an unpredictable life as a child, and knowing that that was modeled to me, and that this stuff is just by nature in me because I don't want to think about it. I don't want to have to take that seriously because it's hard, and it's like I'd much rather not do that. I'd rather just kind of believe like, oh, money will always be there and everything will be fine. Like, that's a very easy way to think for me. And in some ways, it's not always a bad thing because it's definitely optimistic. But I just need to make sure I'm being realistic at the same time.
And so many things I could say that they're all like floating in my head at the same time. But the one thing I wanted to say is right there, because of what you just said is an example of that, what you guys were puzzling over in that first video about optimism and cynicism, because you just like expressed both in that same thing. Because you talked about the optimism part of like, money's going to be there and something to work out, but then the cynicism, it was in like, I don't want to screw up being a parent, so that's why I want to do want to have these preparations and things like that. And the other thing I thought was that in a sense that's sort of the opposite of me, because I didn't wait and ended up a single parent and then had to learn as I went on a whole lot of things that I was not prepared for but adapted to. Mm-hmm. And really at a very early point, I just the way that I dealt with that was simply just making my number one priority taking care of my son in whatever way I thought I needed to do that. So everything else sort of took a back seat where it revolved around that. And so my adaptation was he's basically the center of my world, and then everything else moves in response to that. So that doesn't mean that I didn't, still have a life, but it was always in consideration of where is he, what's he going to be doing, what time do I have, my job, my personal life, everything revolved around what was best for him in my view. Mm-hmm. So that was how I did it. So, there's, you can have a certain amount of preparation, you can do what you will, and still there's going to be things that come at you that you're not prepared for and you have to deal with when it happens. So, obviously there's different approaches to that, but and I'm not even saying that to any way criticize your decisions or anything like that.
Oh, no, I didn't feel that way at all.
Yeah. It's somebody who, you know yourself better than anybody else, and what your limitations are, and what things you want to approach in what ways. I just was making the case for you can, not necessarily be prepared or mature or any of those things, and still you can adjust and basically those maturity, those things can happen like on the way. It's sort of like mm-hmm. that. It rather than getting myself prepared to be a parent, being a parent made me grow up in a sense.
Oh yeah,
maybe would have because it's you said being the biggest commitment, but it is that it's also like maybe the biggest like thing that whatever that the word would be, something that makes you mature faster.
Catalyst.
Because you just have to, if you care. Obviously there's some people that simply they really don't ever adjust their own life, and their kids do kind of take a backseat to them, and that's just the way they are. It's unfortunate, but that does obviously happen. But I think if I might make a case for ESFPs, I think probably the overwhelming majority of us do care and will adjust to having a child, and it may not necessarily be what the SJs think is the right way to parent, but it's still adjusting to that and maturing within that context.
Yeah, I just want to do the best possible job that I can do, and I have I guess, my parents, when they had me, they were much older, so I also had that modeled of like having older parents, and that's mm-hmm. It was fine, and I think that was a good thing. So I can adapt and adjust, and I will have to within many, many things. I kind of just want to give myself like as much of a leg up as possible, like to where I'm not going to set myself up to like really struggle or like, possibly sink if I'm not. It's more of being emotionally ready, I think, for me. Knowing that I can do it and knowing like I'm ready for this. Mm-hmm. Like if I happen to have get pregnant and have a child, I would do it, and I would know I would do it. But I want to go into it feeling like I chose that. Like, yeah, I'm in for this. I guess I did choose it if I was pregnant.
No, Ben put up my T middle finger. It's too bad Hannah's not here because we talked about that the last time we were doing the thing with her. But do you want me to explain this, Ben? Or
yeah, too bad who wasn't here.
Was her name Hannah? I think it was.
The Finnish woman.
You
go on, Maria.
I just wanted to say that I noticed in many cases that once an SP makes somebody else the center of their lives, they don't appear as much SPs anymore. They're more like SJs.
Interesting.
And that's because that's what happens in opposition shifting. Things turn upside down.
Yeah, I think
it's like for my type, you have a lot more extroverted intuition when you are there for your kids and with your kids than by yourself. And for you guys, it would be more introverted sensation. You become more sensitive to comfort issues, and you have a lot more memory.
Yeah, I think you have to adapt to the situation, and so it comes off, things that you probably before being a parent would have seen, not as being something to rebel against. You kind of learn, I've got to do some of these things, regardless. It's just the logistical stuff that has to be taken care of. But the overall philosophy and perspective is still the same. It's not going to match because a lot of SJ parents, I think, so much of the time, like they want to mold their kids into images of themselves, or they want them they seek a certain path for them, or a certain social class, or a certain thing like that. Where I think with SP parents are more likely to be like, give my child the opportunity to figure out what they're into and do it.
It's like my father is an ESTP, but for a long time I mistyped him for some SJ type until I learned more about what he was like by himself, not what he wanted to be for us.
Mm-hmm. With my father, it was I initially thought he was SP and then figured out that he was actually an INTJ. So because I looked at certain elements of his, womanizing and things like that, and sort of placed a stereotype on it before I really, examined much about like what his actual motivations were.
Yeah, I think we're planning on having like a separate hangout where we go through all of Jeff's MBTI Step 2 results, and it'd be sort of like a tribute to MBTI Step 2, but also a critique in certain areas.
Yeah.
Well,
but the reason I asked Ben to have the picture up of this one, which I affectionately refer to as my T middle finger, is because the Step 2, what it does is it breaks down each dichotomy into like these separate sections that are sort of make it up. And even though like when I do the Step 1, I'm like 100% F. If you look at this, you can see that there's that middle area where I'm like all the way the other direction. And that doesn't make me a T. It's really more, it shows my SP. Because that area, the questioning, precise, challenging, want discussion, it's like this is kind of what we were talking a little bit about earlier, where when you're pushing boundaries and testing limits, and the area that I do that in is especially like it's an attempt to get to know people, but I'll challenge people's opinions or views, not to try to prove them wrong, but to get to know them, get to know where they come from, why they came to these ideas. And so I don't just swallow, what somebody presents as, oh, this is just, that you declare this and so it's true. I want to get at, why they believe things and what really is at the heart of it. And that's to me what that section is about. So it's just a funny coincidence that it ends up being the middle one that, so it looks like a hand with a middle finger going up. So, because all the other ones, it's like nearly 100% the other way, or, the so-called feeling preference within that one. And I think it's not really that, that it's a thinking preference. It's just the SP temperament kind of results in that kind of behavior, I think.
And I can give an example of that. Like a lot of the times in the Hangouts with Jeff, where I bring up some theory, especially socionics theory, like Jeff will like challenge me on if I like generalize too much. So it's like the intent is to like go towards a specific. It's like an artisan.
Yeah, it's trying to get to the details and trying to get to what's real. It's not an attempt to embarrass anybody or try to be negative towards them. It's trying to draw out the truth in what people are saying and the elements of that, where it came from. But some people can be rubbed the wrong way by that because they assume any kind of challenging or questioning of them is like trying to be antagonistic or attacking them, and that's not what it is.
That's kind of what Bradley was saying, and that's why I said it was so valuable to have his feedback from an outside of like what it feels like to receive that energy that an ESFP can give, and it is probably pretty intense. Like, what do you do with that? How do you navigate that? If like it's very intrusive at times, I imagine.
Yeah,
I mean, I know what it feels like to be doing, like putting that energy out, and despite my motives or reasons, they're all good. Like, I can tell sometimes it's not received, like it's like a threat, kind of.
Yeah, I noticed one thing yesterday. I was looking at the pictures of an SP ESP actor, and I caught myself feeling like I'm looking at this person's pictures, and I already feel like my boundaries are crossed because of the extroverted sensation.
That's funny. What did you have something to say about that, Bradley?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's very much a two-way interaction, because the ESFP is doing something and then the person receiving in some way, and that makes it, to me, it's always very tricky because it can vary depending on my own mood. As in, if I'm in the mood to sort of deal with it, then it's one thing, and if it's like I'm not in the mood, if the timing's off, then it's just unpleasant for everyone, sort of thing. But I think in terms of SPs in general, just sort of testing, they just generally test. It's
Probing.
Probing, exactly. It's like their own form of whereas I guess intuitives is likely to like intellectually test. SPs test by actually doing it. So this is where multiple intelligence it comes in handy, because there's more than one way to learn things. There's more than one way to learn by doing is very much an SP approach.
I have a bit of theory on this, but Jeff will like me because it's like in a Keirsey theory way. I'm not talking about socionics here. So it's like when you said there about probing people, and so it's like Keirsey did have this thing about are you directive or are you informing? But like as you said there, the SPs are going to be maybe informing in a different way from the NFs. What do you think about that, Jeff?
True. And when I was thinking about people's responses to it, like he was saying, in terms of the online typology circles, when I do challenge those theories that people just declare without any kind of backing to it, the reaction is usually like the NFs, it's like their feelings are hurt by it, like I'm questioning their validity or something like that. And with the NTs, they usually turn it back around like, well, I must just not understand it on the intellectual level that they do. That's why I don't get it. Not that they could possibly be wrong, but that it's my limited understanding that causes me to not get their theory because it's too high level for me.
Do you think that could be true?
Yeah. Rather than a situation though where you have Jeff as an SFP, an experienced SFP who's interested with people, and you've got like an NT, maybe like a young NT that's not very good with people, but they have a very simplified mechanical view of people and limited experience.
Those tend to be the know-it-alls. I mean, usually older, more mature NTs don't take as much of that kind of I know everything and you can't possibly teach me anything attitude. Usually they're mature enough to realize that that they want to learn from anybody's perspective, even if they don't necessarily agree with what they're presenting. They take it in. I've seen that even online. I've seen some more mature NTs that I can tell that it's like they can express disagreement, but do it in a way that it's not like, it doesn't come off with the same arrogance. Like, I know everything and you're this simpleton who doesn't get it. It's more like, here's the way I see it, but I appreciate your input to take into account in my evaluation of this whole thing. So I've seen the contrast, of the different attitudes that way.
I have to head out, guys. Thanks for the spend and good to see everybody.
Yep, that's
All
good.
right.
See you next time.
See ya.
Hopefully we can do the technical intellect next time, and then also Jeff's. In fact, it might be good to do Jeff's preferences next time, depending on. Right then, so folks, I'm going to end this now, and then we're going to have a little chat amongst ourselves. So bye bye, viewers.
Bye.